All right, this is episode 2 of the Hammer Factor. We have a new co-host. Is it called a co-host if it's 3 people? I'm not sure about that. But anyway, welcome to the show, Louis Geltman, Hood River native, ex-slalom racer, former North Fork champion. Here's a fact I didn't know about until this email came across. Poker player and current policy counsel for Outdoor Alliance. Welcome to the show, Louis.
Man, thanks, John. I think most of that was accurate, except that I'm a Maryland native, and I can't remember the last time I played poker, but I'll take the rest of it for sure.
So why did Weld put this poker player in the email? What's that all about?
I don't know. I mean, I guess I used to be pretty avid when I was a little younger and a little poorer than I am now, but if such a thing is possible, but it's been a minute.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you played on some kind of poker circuit of some sort, didn't you? Or you earned a living playing poker?
No, I lived in Tahoe for a winter, and I was just super underemployed, and I would go hang out at the casinos, and I could scrape out like $10 an hour hanging out with all the deadbeats in the Tahoe casinos, and it was a little supplement to my meager income.
I think that's awesome.
It was all right. A lot of those days are behind me, I think.
So what does it mean, current policy counsel for Outdoor Alliance? What is that?
So Outdoor Alliance, we are the national advocacy group for human-powered outdoor recreation, and we started as a coalition of American Whitewater and kind of its equivalent groups for climbers, mountain bikers, backcountry skiers. And we work on public lands management issues that are kind of significance to our whole community. So kind of conservation through the lens of recreation, basically.
Okay, cool.
And the council part is because I went to law school. The policy part is because that's mainly what I do is almost more like lobbying than kind of traditional legal work. But it's good. I'm psyched. I care about our work a lot, and I don't feel like I'm just kind of selling my time. It's like I think we make a difference. And thinking about what you were saying last week, Grace, about AW, it's like I get a chance to work with those guys pretty closely, and also with kind of their peer organizations. And AW is really, really an amazing group. I mean, for how few of us there are, how few kayakers, what a small group of people we are, those guys are able to really make a huge difference. And it's a pretty awesome thing to be a part of. And I hope everybody kind of, supports those guys.
So Louis, I have a question for you. Before we do that though, Grace, I demand an introduction.
Of you, John Weld?
Of me, I demand one.
Okay.
It's I've earned this right.
Okay.
I've put in the hours. Go ahead.
And our second co-host, Whitewater legend and owner of Immersion Research, John Weld. Welcome back to issue number 2.
Okay, thank you. Having gotten that aside, Louis, you and I talk about, me, I'm like, they call me Jeopardy because everything I say is in the form of a question, but I'm always asking about your job. What, and I always find something interesting that you're doing. What do you, give us an issue right now that paddlers should know about that we don't, that you're working on?
So I think a big thing to know about right now is there's this campaign out there that's coming from a lot of kind of fringe right-wing folks in the West to turn over the nationally managed public lands to the states. And so this is like kind of like the most flamboyant example of this is like these guys who took over the bird sanctuary out here in Oregon with guns and cowboy hats and everything. But there's this movement out here there to like turn over national forests, BLM land to the states. And it all gets kind of like cloaked in this like states' rights kind of language and talking about, the people who live there, the locals, they're able to manage these areas better. But what it really is about is just kind of like circumventing all the federal environmental protections, all the conservation stuff, and turning this land over for, timber, for oil and gas development. And, it started out as this kind of like fringe movement in the West, but we're seeing it more and more in Congress. Bills that turn over parts of national forests to states, or like kind of pave the way for privatizing public lands outright. And, I think it started off as this kind of crazy idea that people were just like, oh, it's never going to happen. Like maybe we shouldn't even really, respond to it, but it's kind of growing in a disconcerting way. And it's even, it's a part of the Republican, like national policy platform this year. So if you're voting for Republicans, you're voting for this idea, really.
That's sketchy. I read an article the other day about not only was there, policy changes taking place, but even if the policy didn't get changed, they were just taking away the funding to make it look like the federal government was being inept at taking care, just really kind of stacking the odds. Even if they can't change the policy now, they're trying to, basically by taking away the purse strings, make it look like this is something that the federal government can't afford to take care of.
Huge issue. It's like, if you do kind of starve the land management agencies, then they sort of look less and less effective at doing their jobs, and people get more and more angry about, failures of the Forest Service or the BLM or whatever. And you're right. I mean, I think it really is by design to, keep those guys from being able to do their jobs. And it's unfortunate. I mean, another big part of that whole thing is more and more money is getting spent on fighting fires out here in the West with climate change and everything. And it's just soaking up a bigger and bigger portion of the land management agency's budget. And that's not being replaced. And so that's another big thing we're working on, is trying to help the land management agencies be able to fund forest firefighting with disaster funding in the same way that we would respond to a hurricane or a tornado or other natural disasters, so that fire doesn't just consume the entire agency budget.
Right.
So anyway, nerdy public land stuff.
Well, we have 27 loyal subscribers so far to the show. What can they do right now, immediately? What would you recommend if they were interested?
Go out and check out protectourpublicland.org. Is kind of a little website we set up for this public lands heist stuff. Get on our mailing list, and we'll keep you up to date on opportunities to get involved.
Protectourpublicland.org.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Very cool. I had no idea, Louis.
Yeah, man. There's something out here between little white laps.
So let's go back to last week real quick, because we had a couple things we talked about, and I know Louis enough to know that he probably has a few things to chime in, to add to that. One of them for sure is the paddle length conversation, and I don't want to. This seems like such a silly thing, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but this is an issue that is so near and dear to me. And Louis, what do you see happening with the length and offset of paddles?
Well, I just wanted to share with you, John, that I feel like you're maybe a little bit behind the times out there.
Yeah.
Out here, high offsets are kind of coming back into fashion, and definitely long paddles. I think Benny Marr was using a 208 for a while. I think Evan uses a 205. So not only if you're using a short, low offset paddle, does John think you're an idiot, but behind the times on current Pacific Northwest whitewater fashion. So get with the program.
Certainly an issue on par with any kind of land management issues, I would argue. Danny Mungo, if you're out there, take note.
Oh, God, what is Danny doing to paddle length? Somebody stop him.
He has an agenda. He's part of the right-wing agenda to ruin our industry and sport. And then, of course, the boat length and the boat restrictions in the sick line race.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a balancing act, right? Between creating incentives for progression in boat design and boat construction, and not making it so that the average person feels like they can't participate or can't win, right? It's you want boat companies going out and building sick boats. And, if you artificially cap the length, it's nobody's going to build a boat right now that's 9'4", because you're not going to be able to race it. And, there's not a lot of incentive to figure out new materials because, you know, the market's not there. But at the same time, there's like probably no quicker way to destroy interest in creek racing than making it feel like if you don't have like a $3,500 composite boat, you have no chance of winning, right? Yeah. So it's like you don't want to make it just like totally open where nobody's going to be able to afford to participate anymore. But you don't want to, you know, just like stifle innovation either. So it's like, I don't know, maybe they need to sit down and be like, say, you know, in 2018, we're going to lower the weight limit by, you know, 3 kilograms and open it up to, you know, and allow boats that are 3 inches longer. And then you give everybody a little lead time and everything else. Or I don't know. I mean, it's just, you got to balance those two things, I think.
Oh, shoot. I don't know. What do you, I don't know. It's hard to, I mean, at this point, it's hard for me to distinguish like something like the Stikine race or the North Fork Championship, or, I mean, they're exciting races, but they're still like, there's no real, it's almost like a recreational event, you know. It's not I wouldn't consider them to be, you know, on par with a slalom world championships or even like a freestyle world championships. They're just a random event, you know.
Really? What do you think? Do you think that, Louis?
In a way, but I think that there's some upside to that as well. You know, it's like you really want to see, if you really, you know, took it to that level, I think that it would kill interest pretty fast in a lot of ways.
Why is that?
Require a lot more money and a lot more resources. Because I think what's cool about it is how is it's accessible. You know, it's like if it turns into something where if you're not doing 2 workouts a week, dead focused on that race, you're never going to be able to compete. Or if you need like some super hyper specialized boat, you know, even if you did say you kept the length restriction at 9 feet, if you really wanted to make the ultimate boat for creek racing, like it would probably suck for paddling every day. You know, you could make like a little mini wild water boat that was 9 feet long, and it would probably be the ticket for something like Stikine. But you know, it's not the boat you'd want to paddle all the time. I sort of worry.
Yeah, it could get weird.
Let's flip this around a little bit and put this on a different light. I mean, what happened with slalom? Because slalom had, at least in the U.S., had all the structure in the world. It had, you know, the race series and the pathway to the Olympics and a governing body and, you know, well-defined rules. And here it is, deader than a doornail in the United States. What went wrong? And will it ever come back?
You know, what I think? Yeah.
And are there lessons to be learned for people putting on the Stikine or North Fork championships? I mean, is there a lesson to be learned there?
I'll tell you what went wrong is the Olympics.
What's that?
I think what went wrong is the Olympics. You know, it's like all of a sudden there's this pressure from outside of the sport that keeps it from evolving and keeps it from changing and keeps it from growing. It's like instead of letting the sport evolve in the direction of something like the North Fork Championship, it's actually compelling to people who are kayaking. The direction of the sport is set by like the needs of this event once every 4 years, where, you know, you can never have it on a natural river because you need to be able to have all these spectators and it needs to be on television and it needs to be in a city and everything like that. And all of a sudden the direction of the sport is disconnected from the people who are the grassroots.
Yeah, there's something to be said for that. I mean, look at what the Olympics is doing, bringing in a bunch of non-traditional sports. You know, the Olympics, you know, it's kind of like you say, the other sports are now driving what the Olympics is doing, rather than a lot of people are always like, oh, if it's in the Olympics, it's going to be great. But that's not the case. That's not what's happening. That a lot of other sports are driving what's actually going to be competed at in the Olympics. So,
well, I think what Louis is saying is actually kind of interesting, because my wife, who was a U.S. team member for many, many years, there's definitely sort of it's not unspoken, but it's not something that's really thrown around a lot. But there are a lot of people out there who are in the sport who would agree that the Olympics, whitewater slalom going to the Olympics, was probably one of the biggest reasons why it's not that popular today. And if you tell a non-slalom paddler that, they're shocked and they think you're throwing out some kooky conspiracy theory. But there's a surprising number of people out there who think that. And I mean, I could see how when you went to like the team trials pre-Olympics, you'd have the chance of making a team, like a men's team that was quite large. But when the Olympic team trials came around, by the time when the sport became focused on the Olympics, it would be one person, one guy would make the team. And I think a lot of people felt like, I'm not even going to bother. I'm just not, I don't even have a chance of making that. So I'm going to bow out.
Yeah. Now there's interest in having like a women's C1 category, but because of all these like arbitrary restrictions from the IOC, it's going to have to come at the expense of C2. And it's like, you shouldn't have to choose between having a C2 class and having a women's C1 class, right? Like, you should be able to have both, but there are these restrictions on the number of the athletes at the Olympics. Now they're going to like get rid of C2 basically. And it's like, it's just coming from, pressure's coming from outside of the sport. And it just doesn't seem like the benefits are really there, except for, a handful of people who are at the very top.
So I have another theory too, and this is maybe no topic for another show, but I have a greatest generation theory about kayaking. And you guys, you young kids don't remember this, but I remember going to things like the Petersburg race in West Virginia, right? And this would be like late 70s, early 80s, right? And there would be hundreds of people at this race. And this would be a race in the middle of nowhere in West Virginia in like March. It was freezing. Or the Sea Cats. This was a group of kids racing for the Canoe Cruisers, a canoe club in D.C., with dozens of kids racing slalom and thousands of members of the Canoe Cruisers in D.C., a paddling club. And this was like families going boating on the weekend with their kids, open canoeing or whatever. And that generation, produced the lug bills and the Hearns and the hundreds of people who were training slalom, because it was just such a large feeding system for paddling, and it just doesn't happen nowadays. You just don't see parents. I mean, look at the canoe cruises now. It's a shadow of that. It's just Americans don't outdoor recreate like that anymore. As a result, I don't think we have the feeder system for slalom like we did. It goes back exactly what I was saying earlier. The thing about kayaking and the predicament we're in, I think, as a country, and I have kids and or school age kids right now who are, I'm seeing this firsthand, is that when you talk about what a family in America is going to do on the weekend, it's going to be typically carting your children to some kind of organized team sport, which is fine, right? I have no problem with that. However, there was very, very, very few people taking their family out and doing an outdoor activity like camping or hiking or canoeing or kayaking. Americans as a culture do not do that kind of stuff anymore, right? And so you simply don't have a group of kids who are getting a lifelong love of simply running a river, right? Putting on at one place and taking out at another. And I think that's something you guys probably are old enough to have shared in, and that was what hooked us in the sport. And that's gone. I mean, that feeder system is gone. And what's left to hook people into the sport is thrill seeking, is thrill seekers. People who see kayaking as nothing more than an opportunity to, be extreme. Right. And of course, I'm making a very big generalization here, but I think there's some truth to that. And that's what we're left with. That's the people who are being attracted to the sport, and that's being fed by marketing and Red Bull and the generic image of a kayaker. And of course, it's certainly pleasing to watch, but it's hard to build an industry off of that. I can tell you that firsthand. It's not a lot of people ultimately who are going to do that kind of sport.
No, I hear you.
Louis, do I have that all wrong?
No, I don't think you do. I think it's kind of a shame too. It's like you look back at kids you went to high school with who were like the most amazing athletes, and they played stick and ball sports, and then they went to college and quit and got fat, and that was it.
Yeah.
It's like what are you gonna do with football after you turn 18 or 22?
Yeah.
Like no, right? But kayaking, climbing, riding bikes, I mean, that's forever.
Yeah, and this leads right back into the struggles that you're dealing with at Outdoor Alliance. You just need more people outside doing it. It doesn't matter if it's biking or hiking or kayaking or whatever. You just need more people out there, because if they haven't been out there, they're not vested and they're not going to care.
So now that we're living in extreme sport. That's all we have left, and that's who I sell gear to, and that's who we have to deal with as a sport. Let's talk about the Summer of the Stikine. That's what I'm calling it, where you're seeing a river that was once, really, John, when you ran that, I mean, this was something that was done very seldom under very, very careful planning. And it was a major expedition is suddenly being run, with a new level of audacity, right? I mean, at this point, people are putting on at 2 p.m. to run the Stikine. This is basically something like you leave work early and go knock off the Stikine. What? This is, I mean, in my opinion, I think I'm not here to poo-poo it at all. I think it's an amazing, awesome thing to watch, and I have an incredible amount of respect for these guys. But what's going on? I mean, this seems like another level of whitewater kayaking than even I'm used to.
You want me to take this one?
Take it, John.
Well, let me start off by saying, while it may look like it was, undoubtedly the level is being pushed, as it always does get pushed. And while it looks like, yeah, we're just putting on at 2 and we're taking off at 6 and it was lollipops and bubblegum out there, there's also a bunch of near misses, epic stories. Aniel, I had a conversation with him online about a swim that he had. He swam below Passer Fell. His boat gear went down river. He was on the bank with just a dry bag. Then he went off chasing. Now he's stuck on the side of a cliff all by himself above Wasson's Hole and had to jump in the river and swim like 2 kilometers to his boat through Wasson's Hole, through a bunch of rapids. I don't know if you remember that section below there, Louis.
I got to interrupt you just to say that I feel like this is one of the most next level things I've heard about anyone doing ever in any sport.
Yeah.
I hope that nobody hears this and is like, oh yeah, I can go to the Stikine and like swim Watson's and it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
In Paul's position, I would have curled up in the fetal position on that rock and stayed alive.
Yeah, exactly. I just would have withered away to nothing, and they would have just put a memorial there, and that's just where I lived. You know what I mean? That was just me.
Yeah,
look at those bones. That's Grace.
I mean, yeah.
I don't want it to seem like that, and that's kind of my point. There was epics going on out there. They were pushing, and the river was pushing back, but what I think is happening is I think there's this new push into, for a while back, it was how big of a waterfall can we run? And this is in whitewater. And I think everybody found out where that point was. All right, you can run a 50-footer really consistently. And when you get up to 80 feet, it's things are changing that last 30 feet. The exponential speed, you can feel it when you're in your kayak. You're good a couple, 3 times, boom, you knock the crap out of yourself. And then we got to a certain level and it was like, all right, that's cool, that's what that is. And now it's kind of like, all right, the push is, can we repeat this? Can we be consistent in this stadium and do it over and over and over? And I think that, I think it's just a different direction to the push.
Geltman, you're kind of seeing this firsthand. I mean, I would call Hood River sort of the North Shore of kayaking right now. It's where you have to see, be seen, or, where your careers are made now in big whitewater kayaking. What's going on out there that's different, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Grace was saying. I think that the generation of guys who really push the big waterfall running is starting to, feel the physical effects of that. And the focus is definitely much more on, pushing high water, I think, is something that's become a real focus up here, which is a dangerous game, but like John was saying, I think it's kind of a cooler direction in a lot of ways. There's no lucking your way through that stuff. It's like it's real whitewater. It's getting your strokes in and
Yeah.
Dealing with things as they come. And
I mean, running big waterfalls certainly has, deserved respect in its own regard, but running a long technical class 5 white rapid, that to me is, as a connoisseur of whitewater is a lot more interesting. All right, before we go, Grace, I have to ask you about the Cane Creek Dual Slalom. You mentioned it last week. To me it sounded like a bunch of guys playing around with tractors in the mud. But
Well, okay, a month ago there was no track, and Cane Creek, they make shocks, they make headsets. They're they're a local company. I know the guys over there. And it was literally 4 weeks ago. There was no track. It was just an idea. We announced it. We ended up filling all the spots, all 100 spots. I think when we did the show, we had like 70 people. We ended up with like a 20-something person waiting list. Bunch of kids. We had a class of 16 kids out there, which was really cool, as young as 6 years old. We had pros, I don't know if you know who Nico Malali is, but he was the guy, and I'm sure you've probably seen the video, who broke his chain in the World Cup and still ended up getting 4th place. Did you guys ever see that video online?
Nico Malali's sick.
Yeah, and he ended up winning the men's open class, and I mean, I was just, that was the first dual slalom event that I put on. We had a little epic. We lost our spreadsheet after the second round. Our workbook wouldn't open, and if you're ever on a Mac using Excel and you have to export a text document, be wary. It gets glitchy. But anyway, we had the paper backups, and so we did paper backups and a differential timing system. But I mean, the racing, all the way, like when you got down to the, there was some blowouts when you get your seating the first couple rounds, but I mean, when we were down to the quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals, people were crossing the finish line a half a wheel length in front of each other. So it was really cool. But one of the coolest events I've ever seen, certainly that I've put on in a long time. So thanks for asking, John. It went really good. Everybody was stoked. Nobody got hurt. We had one guy get a concussion, but he shook it off and raced. Or I don't know if he had a concussion. I don't know if he had a concussion, but he took a big digger, but got up and continued to race. So all in all, it was a good time, and I'll put up some pictures and some video so everybody can see what it looked like out there.
All right, rants and raves. It's that time.
All right, start us off, John. Lay it on us. Are you doing a rant or a rave?
Did I rant? I ranted last week. All right, it's going to be tough. Can I rave about a rant? Is that because I love ranting? Okay, I had a short list for my raves, LaCroix being very close to the top of the list. I love LaCroix. The next thing would be well, you know what? Let's not even do that. Let's just get right to the rave. I'm not going to waste your time with this. My rave is going to be the Cheat Canyon, right? Cheat Canyon. No one paddles the Cheat Canyon anymore. I paddled it yesterday with my kid. It was 70 degrees. It was probably 4.5 feet. 2 other people on the river. We're talking 12 miles of class 4 whitewater. 2 people we saw on the river the entire trip. I don't know if it means that our sport is dying, or we just live in a very strange part of the country where people don't go do that kind of stuff, or I don't know what's going on, but it was awesome. And it made me love kayaking because we put on an Albright and we paddled through 12 miles of complete wilderness, and we took off in the middle of nowhere, and we had to cut a tree out of the road. And my son loved it.
I remember coming off this big sandy one day. We got down to the confluence down there, and there must have been like 500 kids from Morgantown there. They had like folding tables set up in the river. There were people standing waist deep playing Beirut on the folding tables down there. There were like police down there moving cars. It was like,
it could be a scene.
Spring break. It was awesome.
Yeah, it could be a scene down there. All right, who's our rave? Is it going to be Louis or Mr. Grace?
That's a rant. You had the rave, Weld.
Oh no, the rant. I'm sorry.
Let's put Louis on the spot here.
All right. have one prepared rant, and that is kayak outfitting. Kayak outfitting is uniformly terrible. I think if people who are in charge of kayak outfitting were building climbing harnesses or ski bindings, we would all be dead. like, do you guys remember that old Piranha ad that was like, we put more in so you get more out, and it was like an exploded view of the kayak, and there was something like 500 parts in the boat?
Yeah.
That was the worst ad, the worst idea I've ever seen in my entire life, and not that much has changed.
Well, what are you looking for in outfitting? Like, what are we missing?
What are we missing? It's too heavy. It breaks constantly. There are too many parts. There are too many adjustments. It's all unnecessary, right? It's like all this stuff is designed so that when you go sit in the kayak for the first time on the floor of the kayak shop, you're like, oh, this is comfortable. And like, that's it. It just, it's like hard to even start, right? But it's like the whole backband concept to me is terrible.
So what do you do instead? Now be careful, because we're the largest manufacturer of backbands in the world.
I'm going to put you out of business right now.
Bring it.
If you sit in a kayak and you lean forward, which is like what you're doing when something rowdy is happening, you're trying to like be aggressive, right? Mm-hmm. The very lowest part of your back presses back against the back of the seat or the backband. Mm-hmm. And the top just gets looser and looser and looser. So if you have this huge backband that's in the middle of your back, it's like doing no good when it matters. It's just sort of like the back of your reclining chair. It's like what you need is like a nice high back seat that's stiff and, relatively low compared to a backband. It's never going to break. It's light. You mean like those
old slalom seats we used to build? We used to stick in the boat that was like cupped like it looked like a mold of someone's ass, and you're leaning forward in it.
That's what I want.
Yeah, I don't know if general consumers want that.
I want no more like ratcheting front of my seat. I want no more like
you're breaking my heart. Can you edit this out, Grace?
I'm going to open the show. I'm going to open the show with this. Well, if you like our show, we promise we'll get better. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel or our RSS feed. A big thank you to Louis, who is going to be a co-host and returning. Correct, Louis? We didn't scare you off?
Yeah, I'm invited. That was fun. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, so...
Legal correspondent.
Yeah, our official legal correspondent. And anyway, this is the Hammer Factor, and may your week be great. We're going to try and launch this thing every Tuesday.